You've probably done this, right? You're messing around with ChatGPT and you think, hey, tell me a joke. And you probably get something that sounds a lot like this. It's a classic setup. You've heard it a million times. It feels like a real, proper joke. And there's the punchline. It's a solid dad joke. You might even get a little chuckle out of it. But that's when a much, much bigger question pops into your head. Is the AI actually coming up with something witty? Or is it just an amazing mimic, just repeating patterns it learned from the internet? Well, that is the exact mystery we are unpacking today. And we're not just guessing here. We're going to get to the bottom of this by digging into a really fascinating study from 2023 by two researchers, Sophie Jenschuk and Kersting, who basically put ChatGPT's sense of humor under a microscope. All right, let's jump in. Here's our game plan. We'll start with the big question, then we'll walk through 3 super clever tests the researchers ran, and finally, we'll get to the actual scientific verdict on AI comedy. So first things first, what does it even mean for an AI to be funny? Can a machine really understand something as human, as kind of weird and complicated as a joke? The researchers, they started out with a hunch. They figured the AI probably wasn't making up jokes from scratch. They thought it was way more likely that it was just pulling them from its massive training data, kind of like a parrot that's learned a few good lines. So that brings us to the first test. How do you figure out if the AI is just repeating itself? Well, you do something really simple, but on a huge scale. You ask it for a joke, over and over and over again, more than 1,000 times. And the results were pretty wild. Of the 1,008 jokes that ChatGPT came up with, over 90% of them were just repeats. And it gets crazier when you look at how small its joke library actually was. Its entire comedy set list was made up of just 25 jokes. In fact, the top 4, including our old friend about the atoms, accounted for more than half of all the answers it gave. So the evidence here was pretty crystal clear. ChatGPT wasn't a comedian writing new stuff. It was more like a DJ with a very, very short playlist. The jokes are being replicated, not created. Okay, so we've established it's a copycat. But that leads to an even deeper question, right? Does it at least understand why the jokes are supposed to be funny? Does it actually get the pun? And this is where things get really strange. Because when the researchers gave it a real joke, it could explain the wordplay perfectly. But when they gave it a totally nonsense joke, it didn't get confused. It just confidently made up an explanation. For example, the AI actually generated this masterpiece. Why did the cookie go to the gem? To get a cookie diced? I mean, that's just gibberish, right? It makes absolutely no sense. But here's the best part. When they asked it to explain that non-joke, it just invented this whole reason about it being a pun on the phrase to get categorized. It was completely faking it. It has zero actual understanding, but it's great at pretending. So what we're seeing is that the AI has learned the pattern of what a joke explanation looks like. It knows it's supposed to mention a play on words, so it just generates text that follows that script, even if there's no real meaning there at all. All right, so if it's just following patterns, what are those patterns? For the final test, the researchers decided to basically reverse engineer ChatGPT's brain to figure out what it considers the essential ingredients of a joke. And they pretty much boiled it down to a 3-part recipe. First, it needs that question and answer structure. Second, there has to be a pun or some wordplay. And third, the topic is usually something a little weird or unrealistic, like a talking scarecrow. So they tested this recipe. They started with a real joke that had all 3 ingredients. Then they took out the pun. And after that, they took out the weird topic, which left just a plain, boring, factual sentence. And you can see exactly what happened here. With the full joke, the AI was 100% confident it was a joke. But take away the pun, and its confidence dropped by over half. Take away both the pun and the weird topic, and its confidence went straight to 0. It didn't see a joke at all anymore. So let's wrap this all up and get to the final verdict. After all these tests, can we really say that ChatGPT is funny? Well, based on this evidence, the answer is a pretty resounding no. What we're actually seeing here isn't humor. It's a really, really advanced form of something called pattern matching. The AI isn't getting the joke. It's just recognizing that certain words and structures are statistically likely to be a joke, and then it copies those patterns. A good way to think about it is like someone traveling with a phrase book. They can say, "Where's the train station?" perfectly, but if you ask them an original question back,
They're completely lost. They know the pattern, not the language.
And this is why this all really matters. When you understand how AI handles something like humor, you stop seeing it as magic. Instead, you see it for what it truly is, an incredibly powerful tool that works with patterns and logic, but one that has clear, predictable limits. It's not a comedian, but it is a master of imitation.